They stole from me for months before I ever decided to steal anything back. And when I say steal, I don't mean a couple apples rolling off a branch. I mean walking into my orchard at night, filling baskets with fruit I'd spent 30 years growing, and serving it on fine china to people who thought rustic was something you bought by the plate. So yeah, I sent 40 pigs to a wedding reception. But that's the middle of the story. Let me back up. My name's Daniel Mercer. I've been farming the same stretch of land outside Briar Glen, Pennsylvania, since I was 28 years old. I'm 61 now. My orchard sits on a gentle slope that catches the morning light just right. Rows and rows of heirloom apple trees I planted with my own hands. Varieties most grocery stores don't even bother carrying anymore. Ashmead's Kernel, Winesap, Stamen, Northern Spy, Arkansas Black. 23 kinds in total, staggered so something's ripening from late August through October. Every tree has a story. Some came from cuttings my grandfather saved in coffee cans. Some I grafted myself in the barn during winters when money was tight and hope was thinner. I've pruned them in snow, sprayed them in spring rain, walked those rows at sunrise with a thermos of black coffee and a dog at my heels. That orchard isn't just my retirement plan. It's my life measured in seasons. Now, right along my southern fence line sits the Hawthorne Estate, a private country club carved out of what used to be dairy pasture. Golf greens, white column clubhouse, lake with swans that I'm pretty sure aren't native to this county. They host weddings, corporate retreats, charity galas, you name it. The kind of events where centerpieces cost more than my first pickup truck. For years, we coexisted fine. Their guests liked taking photos with my orchard in the background, and I didn't mind so long as nobody crossed the fence. Sometimes I'd even get polite inquiries about buying a few crates for autumn events. At a fair price, I was happy to sell. That changed when they hired a new event director, a man named Preston Hale. Preston was city through and through. Tailored jackets, expensive boots that had never seen mud, that kind of easy confidence you get when you've never had to worry about a late frost wiping out your income. He introduced himself one afternoon last spring, leaning on my fence like we were old friends. "Daniel, right?" he said, flashing that polished smile. "I've been meaning to talk to you. Your orchard is exactly the kind of authentic farm-to-table experience our clients are craving." I remember wiping my hands on my jeans and saying, "Authentic, huh? That's usually code for expensive." He laughed like we were sharing a joke. He pitched me on supplying apples for their fall events. Said brides were paying top dollar for local, heritage, story-driven food. I told him I'd be open to discussing wholesale pricing. Then he offered $2 a bushel. I thought I misheard him. $2? I said. "Volume pricing," he replied smoothly. "We'd give you exposure. Feature your farm on the menu cards. Could be huge for you." Now, I sell those apples retail at $15 a bushel at the farmer's market, sometimes more for the rarer varieties. I told him as much. He shrugged. "We can source from distributors if needed, but I prefer to keep it local." I looked at him for a long moment and said, "Local doesn't mean desperate." His smile thinned just a bit. "Think about it," he said, and headed back toward his pristine clubhouse. I didn't think about it long. A week later, I started noticing fruit missing near the south fence. At first it was small stuff. A few apples gone from lower branches. I figured maybe teenagers cutting through at night, or deer. Happens every season. Then entire limbs started looking stripped. Clean. Deliberate. I've been farming too long not to know the difference between wildlife and human hands. So I set up trail cameras along the fence line. Didn't tell anyone. Not even my neighbor Earl, who likes to give advice whether you ask for it or not. 3 nights later, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and sat at my kitchen table scrolling through footage. There they were. Preston Hale in a dark jacket, and 2 catering staff in black polos, climbing through a section of fence they'd clearly loosened ahead of time. They moved with purpose, flashlights low, picking from my best trees, the Honeycrisps and the Arkansas Blacks that had just hit peak color. They filled plastic crates, passed them over the fence, loaded them into a van with the Hawthorne Estate logo on the side. They weren't sneaking snacks. They were harvesting. I won't lie. My hands shook. Not from fear, but from something hotter. I've had storms tear through and take half a crop. I've had insects, blight, late freezes. That's farming. You swallow it and move on. But this was someone deciding your work didn't deserve respect. The next morning, I drove straight to the estate. Walked into that marble-floored lobby in my work boots, smelling like fertilizer and sun. Preston was reviewing floral samples with a bride and her mother. He looked annoyed to see me, but he excused himself. We stepped into a side hallway. "I have you on camera," I said, holding up my phone and playing the footage. He watched, expression barely changing. When it ended, he sighed. "Daniel, we're neighbors. Sometimes surplus produce gets shared. It's not like you're using every apple." "Surplus," I said quietly. "You stripped 3 trees." He adjusted his cufflinks. "Consider it a preview of our partnership, which, by the way, I'm still willing to offer. $2 a bushel. Ongoing contract." I stared at him. "You owe me for what you've already taken." He smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. "If you want to make a legal issue out of neighbors sharing abundance, that's your choice. But litigation can get expensive. For everyone." There it was. Not just theft. Intimidation. I gave him 1 week to pay fair market value for what he'd taken, or I'd file a police report and hand over the footage. He didn't respond. And the picking didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. By peak wedding season, it felt like they were running a second shift in my orchard. Crates disappeared overnight. Branches bent bare. I'd walk my rows at dawn and feel something inside me hardening. Not just anger, but a kind of clarity. Preston didn't see me as a neighbor. He saw me as scenery. As inventory he didn't have to pay for. And that's when I started thinking about the pigs. Now, before you picture some wild, reckless tantrum, you need to understand something about me. I don't act fast when I'm angry. I get quiet. The pigs weren't some spur-of-the-moment revenge fantasy. They were already part of my life. I raise heritage breeds on a pasture behind the orchard. Gloucestershire Old Spots and Mangalitzas mostly, sturdy animals with thick coats and personalities that'll surprise you if you've only ever seen hogs on TV. They're smart. They recognize routines. They know the sound of my truck. And they can smell sugar from farther away than you'd think possible. I started raising them about 10 years ago when apple prices dipped and I needed to diversify. My late wife, Marianne, used to joke that I treated those pigs like house guests. She'd stand on the porch watching me scratch their backs and say, "Danny, if you ever spoil me the way you spoil those hogs, I might start oinking." She's been gone 5 years now. Cancer. Slow and merciless. After she passed, the farm got quieter, but the animals kept me grounded. There's something steady about chores. Feed, water, check fences. It keeps your mind from spiraling. But that summer, my mind did spiral. Because it wasn't just about the apples anymore. The Hawthorne estate had started marketing their events around the Mercer Orchard Experience. I saw it online one night when my niece tagged me in a post. A bride standing in front of my trees, captioned, "A magical evening nestled beside a working heirloom orchard." They never asked permission to use my name. I drove into town the next morning and stopped at the bakery for coffee. A couple women were talking about an upcoming wedding at Hawthorne. "They're doing apple tarts from that orchard next door," one of them said. "So charming." Charming. I smiled politely and left before I said something I'd regret. Back home, I walked the fence line again. Sure enough, the wire had been cut and twisted back neatly. Not sloppy. Deliberate. Like they assumed I wouldn't dare escalate. I considered calling the sheriff. I really did. But here's the thing about small towns. The estate donates to fundraisers. Sponsors Little League. Hosts charity galas. Preston shook hands with county commissioners. If I made noise, it would turn into he said. And in the meantime, I'd be the cranky farmer attacking a local business. And I hated that he counted on that. A few days later, I caught one of the catering kids in the act. Couldn't have been more than 22. Skinny, nervous looking. He froze when he saw me. I thought we had permission," he stammered. "From who?" I asked. "Mr. Hale said it was arranged." Of course he did. I told the kid to get out and not come back. He looked genuinely shaken. That's when it hit me that Preston wasn't just stealing fruit. He was feeding a story to his staff, maybe even to himself, that I was part of the aesthetic. That my silence meant consent. That night I sat at the kitchen table staring at the numbers. Rough estimate. They'd taken close to $8,000 worth of apples by then. Maybe more. That's not pocket change for a farm my size. I poured another bourbon and stepped out onto the porch. The pigs were rustling in the pasture, low grunts and snorts under the stars. And then I remembered something Preston had said in that hallway. Litigation can get expensive. For everyone. He thought he could pressure me into folding. Thought I'd weigh the hassle and decide it wasn't worth it. But he didn't know how stubborn a farmer can be when pushed into a corner. Around that time, word spread that Preston's daughter, Lila, was getting married at Hawthorne in early October. Biggest event of the year. 300 guests. Custom tent on the lawn overlooking my orchard. 7-course plated dinner. $10,000 cake flown in from New York. Earl came by one afternoon, leaning against my truck like he always does. "You hear about that wedding?" he asked. "Hard not to. They're pulling out all the stops. Fireworks permit and everything." I nodded. He studied me. "You're awful quiet lately, Danny." "I'm thinking," I said. "About boundaries." He chuckled. "You planning to build a higher fence?" "Something like that." The week before the wedding, I found more damage. They'd gone deeper into the orchard this time, not just along the fence. Whole crates missing from the storage shed. That meant someone had taken a key or picked the lock. That was the moment it stopped being a business dispute. It felt personal. I drove over to Hawthorne again. Preston was on the lawn overseeing tent setup, barking orders into a headset. "Preston," I called out. He turned, irritation flashing before he masked it. "We're quite busy, Daniel." "You've got one more chance," I said evenly. "Pay me what you owe. Fair market. Or I go to the sheriff with everything." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You really want to make a spectacle before my daughter's wedding? I want my property respected." He gave a small, dismissive laugh. "You're overreacting. This is how partnerships evolve." "This isn't a partnership." He looked past me toward my orchard, then back at the massive white tent rising behind him. "You know what your problem is?" he said softly. "You're stuck in the past. The world's changing. Experiences matter more than ownership now. People don't care who grows the apples. They care about the story." I felt something in my chest tighten. "You're right," I said. "They do care about the story." He smiled, thinking he'd won. That night, I checked every latch on the pig pasture, walked the perimeter twice, made sure the temporary fencing between my land and theirs was still in place. Then I waited. The wedding day arrived bright and unseasonably warm. October sunlight hitting the leaves just as they started turning. The kind of day photographers dream about. By mid-afternoon, luxury cars lined the estate driveway. Music drifted over the hedge. I could smell roasted meat, butter, sugar, and apples. I climbed the small rise at the edge of my property where I could see the tent through a gap in the trees. Guests in suits and silk dresses, champagne glasses flashing. Long tables decorated with what looked suspiciously like my wine saps. My phone buzzed with a notification. Hawthorne had posted a live preview video. Farm-fresh apple tartlets crafted from locally sourced heirloom fruit. Locally sourced. I stood there a long time, listening to laughter float across land I'd tended most of my adult life. Then I walked back to the pasture. The pigs were restless, probably picking up the scent already. They lifted their heads as I approached. "All right," I murmured. "You smell it too, huh?" Here's the thing about pigs. They don't respect velvet ropes. They don't care about curated experiences. They follow their noses. And that day, their noses were pointed straight at $10,000 worth of cake and a buffet lined with stolen fruit. I opened the first gate slowly. Let them move into the holding lane I sometimes use for rotating pasture. From there, it was maybe 60 yards to the decorative hedge Hawthorne had planted along the property line. Decorative, not reinforced. I hesitated for a moment. I won't lie about that. Somewhere in the back of my mind, Marianne's voice whispered, "Danny, don't burn bridges you can't rebuild." But then I pictured Preston in that hallway, calling my harvest surplus. I pictured my wife standing in the orchard years ago, proud of what we'd built. And I decided some bridges deserved to burn. I unlatched the final gate. For a second, nothing happened. The pigs blinked at me. Then one of the younger sows caught the full scent of sugar and bolted. The rest followed. 40 solid, determined bodies surged forward, grunting, squealing, pushing through the hedge like it was tissue paper. I jogged after them just far enough to see what would happen next. And what happened next? Well, the first thing that hit wasn't the cake. It was the silence. For half a second, maybe less. The music kept playing and the guests kept smiling, and 40 pigs burst through a manicured hedge like something out of a fever dream, and nobody quite processed what they were seeing. Then the screaming started. High, sharp, expensive-sounding screams. The lead sow barreled straight toward the dessert table like she'd trained her whole life for that moment. One leap, and her front hooves landed square in the buttercream. The $10,000 cake tilted, hesitated, and collapsed in slow motion. White frosting exploded outward. Gasps turned into chaos. Behind her, the rest of the herd fanned out with impressive efficiency. One knocked over a champagne tower. Another shoved her snout into a platter of apple tartlets. My apples, sending delicate pastry shells flying. A pair of Mangalitzes discovered the charcuterie station and treated it like an all-you-can-eat buffet. The string quartet stopped mid-note. Guests scattered across the lawn, heels sinking into grass, tuxedo jackets flapping. Someone tripped over a folding chair. A waiter dropped a tray and stood frozen as a 300-pound hog trotted past him like he was invisible. I'll admit something I'm not entirely proud of. I laughed. Not loudly. Not like a villain in a movie. Just a short, disbelieving breath that escaped before I could stop it. Because it was absurd. Completely, wildly absurd. Months of simmering frustration erupting into muddy, squealing justice. Preston came running from the head table, his face already flushed before he even saw me. "Daniel," he shouted, as if I'd personally ridden in on the back of the largest boar. He sprinted across the grass, dodging guests and overturned centerpieces. His daughter stood near the altar area, her white dress splattered with mud where a pig had brushed past her. The groom was trying to shoo away a hog that had developed a concerning interest in his tuxedo jacket. "Call them off," Preston yelled when he reached the hedge line. "Are you insane?" I stayed on my side of the property line, hands resting lightly on the fence post. "They must have smelled something," I said calmly. "Pigs have strong noses." He stared at me like he couldn't believe I was real. "You did this deliberately." I shrugged. "I keep my gates closed." Guess they wandered toward what attracted them. Behind him, one of the catering staff was attempting to guard a fruit display, waving a napkin uselessly while two pigs devoured what looked like my Arkansas blacks. Guests were filming now. Phones everywhere. Someone shouted about liability. Someone else yelled for animal control. A bridesmaid climbed onto a table to avoid a particularly enthusiastic hog. Preston grabbed his phone with shaking hands. "You're going to pay for this," he hissed. "For what?" I asked quietly. "My animals following the scent of my own produce." He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Because we both knew. If he pressed too hard, the question of where that produce came from would come up. And that wasn't a conversation he wanted on his daughter's wedding day. Within 15 minutes, the reception was effectively over. The tent looked like a battlefield of frosting and trampled linens. The pigs, bellies full and spirits high, began wandering back toward the gap in the hedge as if nothing unusual had occurred. I herded them home with a bucket of feed, slow and steady. They followed easily, snorting contentedly. Behind me, sirens wailed in the distance. That evening, I got a call from the county sheriff. Calm voice. Professional. "Daniel, we received reports of livestock disrupting an event. They crossed through a hedge on my property line," I said. "Hedges aren't exactly secure fencing." A pause. "Did you intentionally release them?" I let the silence stretch just enough. "I manage my gates daily. Animals sometimes find weaknesses." Another pause. "Well," he said carefully, "we're looking into claims that the event used produce from your orchard without permission." "I have footage," I replied. "Months of it." He cleared his throat. "We'll be in touch." The next week unfolded like dominoes tipping over. Videos from the wedding spread online. Not just locally, nationally. Headlines about runaway pigs destroying a luxury reception. Comment sections split between outrage and barely concealed amusement. Then someone dug deeper. Guests who'd gotten minor injuries during the stampede, twisted ankles, a broken wrist, filed complaints. Insurance investigators started asking questions about the food sourcing. Preston's name came up. So did mine. When the footage of him and his staff harvesting my orchard at night surfaced, the narrative shifted fast. Suddenly, it wasn't a crazy farmer sabotaging a wedding. It was a high-end venue stealing from a local grower and getting poetic payback. The insurance company denied their claim, citing unauthorized use of stolen goods. That part, I'll admit, surprised even me. Preston called once more, 3 days after the wedding. His voice sounded smaller. "What do you want?" he asked. "I wanted to be paid," I said. Silence. "The board is furious," he muttered. "Sponsors are threatening to pull out. I warned you. You humiliated my family." I thought about that. About Lila standing there in her ruined dress. About whether she knew anything about the apples. "I didn't climb your fence at night," I said. "You humiliated yourself." A week later, Hawthorne Estate announced Preston's resignation. Shortly after, 2 board members came to my farmhouse in person. Suits, careful smiles. "We'd like to resolve this amicably," one said. "We value our relationship with the local agricultural community." I almost laughed at that phrasing. They offered to purchase the remainder of my harvest at premium pricing. Written contract, upfront payment, plus compensation for documented losses from the prior months. It was more than I'd originally calculated. I signed, not because I felt triumphant, but because I was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of feeling like I had to guard every branch at night. The orchard returned to its rhythm. Sunrise walks, pruning schedules, quiet. But something in me had shifted. For a long time, I believed being the bigger person meant absorbing disrespect quietly. That if you worked hard enough and stayed honest, the world would eventually recognize it. What I learned is that some people mistake quiet for weakness. Now, I'm not saying what I did was noble. It wasn't. It was messy. It risked collateral damage. And sometimes, late at night, I still wonder if I could have handled it differently. Maybe taken it straight to court from the start. Maybe spared a bride her muddy wedding photos. But then I remember standing in that hallway, hearing my life's work called surplus. And I remember the look on Preston's face when consequences finally arrived. These days, the hedge along the property line has been replaced with reinforced fencing. Hawthorne sources produce through formal contracts. My pigs are still in the pasture, a little heavier, a little wiser. Sometimes guests at the estate ask about the legend of the pigs. It's become part of their marketing in a twisted way. The farm next door with a mind of its own. I don't correct them. I just keep my gates maintained. So here's the question I'll leave you with. Was I justified? Or did I let pride push me too far? If someone takes from you, lies about it, and leans on their influence to silence you, how far is too far when you finally push back? I want to know what you think. Drop a comment and tell me. Was this justice, revenge, or something in between? And if you believe small farmers deserve to be heard when bigger players try to write them out of the story, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who understands what it means to fight for what's yours. Because sometimes, the only thing stronger than a polished narrative is 40 hungry pigs.